I didn't expect a voicemail to end a legacy. But when my father said, "Don't bother coming to the reunion. We're cutting ties," something inside me didn't break, it finally stopped pretending. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about clarity. About the quiet strength it takes to walk away from a family that only saw you as useful, never as equal. If you've ever felt invisible in the places where you should have felt safest. If you've ever mistaken silence for love. This story is for you. You're listening to ErasedMe, where untold voices find space, and where endings are just the beginning. If this speaks to something inside you, don't forget to subscribe, share with someone who needs it, and let your voice be heard in the comments. Because here, being seen isn't a reward. It's a right. It was 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday when the voicemail arrived, no greeting, no hesitation. Just my father's voice, clipped and cold like a boardroom memo. Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. 18 words. Maybe 19 if you counted the pause before he hung up. I listened to it twice. Not because I didn't understand, but because I thought I should feel something more: rage, heartbreak, betrayal. Instead, I felt still. Like a piano string that finally stopped vibrating after being held too tight for too long. There was a tea kettle whistling in the background, almost comically domestic. I let it scream until it died down on its own, matching the quiet inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't call back. I didn't forward the message to my mother, who always stayed out of business matters unless there was a photo op. I simply texted him, "Understood." Then I sat in silence for a while, watching the shadows from my kitchen window stretch over the floor like they were trying to swallow the room whole. Something about the way the dark crept in felt honest, unlike the years I'd spent pretending our family was whole. I knew in that moment that this wasn't a rupture. It was a confirmation. What had been unspoken for years had finally been said out loud. And somehow, that felt less like abandonment, and more like relief. My name is Harper Lane. I'm the youngest of two, though sometimes it felt like I was just an extra line item on a family budget, necessary, but never celebrated. My father, Warren Lane, built Lane Autoar from the dust of a single garage. He was a mechanic first, then a franchise owner, then the head of a regional chain. Brick by brick. Bolt by bolt. He didn't just build a business, he built a kingdom, and he ruled it like one. My brother Rhett? He was the crown prince. Loud, impulsive, magnetic in that reckless sort of way that made people forgive him before he even apologized. Which he rarely did. He had my father's grin, his walk, his ease. And in my father's eyes, that was enough. Me? I kept the books balanced, the inventory accurate, the invoices timely. While Rhett was out building vision, I was the one organizing vendor contracts and smoothing out back-end chaos. I was the daughter who became a shadow, essential, but unseen. By 16, I could read a cash flow statement faster than most managers. By 19, I was auditing warehouse operations during my spring breaks while my friends posted beach selfies. No one asked. They expected. No thank yous. Just more tasks. And every time I delivered, they looked past me, as if competence made me invisible. My mother, Lynette, wasn't cruel. She simply drifted with the current. She folded invoices while stirring sauce, smiled through board meetings, and whispered afterward, "Your father's building something for us. Be grateful, sweetheart." So I tried. God, I really did. But somewhere along the way, being useful replaced being wanted. And that hurt more than I was ever allowed to admit. 2 years ago, when Lane Autoar needed a $2.5 million expansion loan, the bank requested a secondary applicant with excellent credit. Rhett was out, too much debt. My father didn't want to risk his personal assets. And me? I had clean numbers, a Harvard MBA, and no reason to say no. There was no family meeting. No heart-to-heart. Just a stack of papers and a pen left on the kitchen counter beside a cooling cup of coffee. The signature line already highlighted in yellow. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if I'd be thanked. Wondering if this act of trust, would finally let me inside whatever circle had always excluded me. I was loyal. Tireless. Quiet. Surely that meant something. It didn't. I signed anyway. Not because they begged. Not because they asked. But because I still believed that if I proved myself irreplaceable enough, they'd stop treating me like an extra. Looking back, it wasn't duty that moved my hand, it was hope. Hope that maybe this was the moment my name would mean more than the reliable one. But hope is dangerous when it goes unanswered. In that silence, I created narratives, they'll see me someday. They just don't know how to say thank you. But silence isn't love. It's neglect dressed in politeness. A ghost in the family photo. That night, I opened my laptop and found my name still tied to that loan. My name, my risk. Not theirs. And suddenly I saw it clearly. I hadn't been brought in to share the legacy. I had been absorbed into it, without a seat, without a voice, and without a future. My father didn't love order, he worshipped control. He built Lane Ottawa the same way he built our family home, brick by brick, rule by rule, until there was no space left for softness. Everything had a system. A schedule. A place. Even love, if it existed, had terms and performance reviews. The garage was built before the nursery. The business had a name before I did. He used to say it like gospel, we don't hire outsiders. We raise replacements. I remember hearing that for the first time when I was 9, at a company cookout, no less, while I was setting out napkins. It was meant as pride, but it felt like a sentence. Rhett, 3 years older, got to be wild and still adored. He crashed a company van at 17 and was rewarded with a new project car to learn responsibility. I, on the other hand, was reprimanded for mislabeling a parts invoice at age 12, because sloppiness leads to lawsuits. By 14, I was helping organize tire shipments into QuickBooks. At 16, I was running payroll over spring break while my friends went skiing in Tahoe. At 19, I stopped asking for birthdays off. No one ever said I couldn't be a teenager. They just made it clear the family had more urgent needs. And I, being the good one, never questioned it. My mother floated in and out of the background, always tidy, always smiling, always saying, "Your father's building something that will outlast us all." Maybe that was true. But he never asked if we wanted to be the scaffolding. He didn't raise replacements. He constructed tools. And I was the most reliable one in the shed. Until I started realizing I didn't want to be used anymore. The first crack didn't sound like breaking. It sounded like laughter. We were in a quarterly budget meeting, just me, Rhett, and our father. I had flagged a $12,000 vendor invoice, duplicated over 3 months. A clear mistake. Or so I thought. "That's from a friend of mine," Rhett said, waving it off like a bit of lint on his designer collar. "Let it slide. He gives us good rates elsewhere." I turned to my father, waiting for a frown, a question, anything that resembled accountability. But he didn't flinch. He sipped his coffee and muttered, "Focus on bigger things, Harper. Stop acting like an outsider." Outsider. The word landed like a slap across the face, not loud, but stinging and lasting. I wasn't a temp. I wasn't an intern. I'd renegotiated vendor leases, optimized logistics for 4 site expansions, and kept payroll balance during 2 supply chain disruptions. But the second I questioned anything that didn't fit inside the box of silent compliance, I became foreign. That was the moment something in me shifted, not with anger, but with realization. I had thought I was part of the foundation. But I was just drywall, painted over, easily replaced. After that meeting, I noticed the changes. My login credentials stopped working. Financial dashboards were read-only. The company card tied to my name expired. It was never renewed. Whenever I asked, they said, it's just system restructuring. But deep down, I knew. They weren't restructuring the system. They were restructuring me right out of it. It started small, almost imperceptible. First, I couldn't log into our back-end vendor system. Then, the internal dashboard redirected me to a read-only view. I thought it was a glitch. IT said it was temporary. But temporary became weeks. Weeks became policy. The company card tied to my name expired. When I inquired about a replacement, Rhett chuckled, "We're tightening spending, sis." Funny how his new standing desk and leadership summit in Vegas didn't qualify as excess. It wasn't just inconvenience. It was methodical erasure. Every day, a piece of my access, my authority, evaporated. The office once labeled operations strategy suddenly bore a new sign. Vision and innovation, Rhett Lane. And just like that, my title dissolved into air. No one fired me. No one even confronted me. They simply redefined the room so I no longer fit inside it. And yet, I was still expected to smile at meetings, finalize spreadsheets, and respond to client emails, some of which Rhett had begun signing in my name. At night, I sat by my dining table, flipping through printed statements I wasn't supposed to have. I started keeping copies, quietly, meticulously. I named the folder on my laptop Shadow Ledger. It felt like naming a ghost. I didn't know what I was building. Not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. If they were going to erase me, I was going to document every brushstroke. Because sometimes survival means keeping receipts. Even when no one believes you'll need them. By the end of that month, I had over 200 files in my Shadow Ledger folder, screenshots, invoices, bank statements, emails were Rhett CC clients but signed off using my name. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for. A confrontation? A lawsuit? Maybe just the truth, in case one day I needed to remind myself that it all actually happened. There was something strangely empowering in the act of collecting proof. Like each document I saved clawed back a piece of my agency. They thought I was blind, that my silence meant surrender. But silence, for me, had become strategy. One night, after cross-referencing a purchase order with a misdated invoice, I knew I needed help. Quiet help. So I messaged Danielle Keller, an old law school friend I hadn't spoken to in years. We had once spent an entire semester sharing notes and late-night takeout during contract law. She was sharp, ethical, and most importantly, discreet. We met at a small coffee shop near the courthouse. She ordered mint tea, I ordered nothing. My hands were too shaky to sip. "I need to ask you something," I said. Hypothetically. Danielle listened patiently as I laid out a careful version of the story, enough to paint the picture, not enough to raise alarms. When I finally asked, "If a cosigner wants to withdraw from a business loan, what happens?" she paused. "That depends," she said slowly. "If you're not listed as a guarantor, and you weren't involved in any misuse, legally, you may be able to remove your name." The word "may" echoed, but it was enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to realize. Maybe I wasn't trapped. Maybe I was just waiting for the right exit. It was a Thursday morning in early spring when everything snapped into place. The trees outside my office window were just starting to bud, bright, hopeful, oblivious. Meanwhile, something rotten had been festering in the bones of the business I once helped build. I'd received my monthly credit summary. I almost didn't open it, habit more than worry. But there it was, buried in the fine print. Lane Holdings, Deferred Payment Review. Lane Holdings. A shell company my father had created years ago for real estate acquisitions. It had been dormant. Or so I thought. Curious, I dug deeper. What I found wasn't just disappointing, it was infuriating. The expansion loan I co-signed 2 years ago was in arrears. 3 payments behind. Grace periods maxed out. Vendors delayed. But the business had continued operating under a fragile illusion, held up, in part, by my clean credit and silent name. I hadn't seen a financial report in months. Hadn't been invited to a board meeting since last fall. The last time I asked Rhett for an update, he sent a winking emoji and the words "No worries, sis. Big vision coming. Vision doesn't pay debt. Vision doesn't erase forged initials." I opened archived records. I compared vendor payments to budget projections, ones I had written. And then it hit me. $40,000 in consulting fees funneled through Rhett's college roommate. Marketing testing campaigns with no deliverables. Triple-billed fleet repairs. Quotes signed with my initials, ones I never approved. This wasn't mismanagement. It was design. And I was the keystone, quiet, dependable, and conveniently blind. But not anymore. That night, I met with Danielle again. I brought the full ledger. She reviewed every page like a surgeon before an operation. And when she looked up, her voice was calm but sharp. "You're not listed as a guarantor. If you want out, now's the time." That night, I renamed the folder from Shadow Ledger to Redemption Plan. Inside were spreadsheets, flagged PDFs, screenshots of altered invoices, emails where Rhett signed contracts under my name. There was even a side note I had written to myself weeks earlier: "They taught me loyalty. I taught myself survival." Danielle and I had spent 2 late nights drafting the withdrawal letter, short, factual, legally airtight. I had hesitated before. Now, I didn't. At 2:11 a.m., I logged into the loan portal using the administrative credentials I had created 2 years ago, back when I still thought I was protecting a legacy. The screen flickered, then loaded. Co-applicant status, active. Modification options available. My hands didn't shake. I clicked remove. Then I uploaded the signed withdrawal letter. Typed in my PIN. Hit submit. There was no dramatic animation. No sirens. Just a quiet message in gray at the bottom of the screen. Update received. Pending compliance review. It was done. The next step was risk control. I drafted a summary report, factual, direct, emotionally sterile. I attached records of vendor discrepancies, financial misuse, and internal access restrictions. Then I emailed it to Keith Herner, the bank's loan manager, the same man I negotiated terms with 2 years ago. I didn't call. I didn't rant. I didn't plead. I just handed him the truth, wrapped in digital precision. Within the hour, the bank froze Lane Holdings' operating account. No memo to my father. No warning to Rhett. Just silence. But this time, it was mine. That night, I turned off my phone for the first time in years, completely off, not just silenced or tucked under a pillow. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt enormous. I slept soundly, dreamlessly, and when I woke, the world was still spinning, just not theirs. By 9 a.m., I had 32 missed calls. By noon, there were 78. My mother. My father. Rhett. Even Gordon Maddox, the family's longtime accountant, left a frantic voicemail. "Harper, call me. This is serious. The loan's collapsing. The bank froze everything. You need to fix this. Do you hear me? You have to fix this." I listened to it twice. Not because I was confused, but because I wanted to remember the sound of panic on someone else's tongue for once. By late afternoon, Rhett finally texted. "What the hell did you do?" Then another. "You're overreacting. We could have handled this internally." But there was no we. Not anymore. There hadn't been in a long time. That evening, my mother called. Her voice wasn't angry. It trembled, like she was trying to balance grief and guilt on the edge of her tongue. Sweetheart, your father says the bank may recall the loan. Did you sign something? I did, I said, flatly. You can't just do that, she whispered. Actually, I can, I replied. And I did. She paused, as if searching for a thread to pull me back. Harper, this affects all of us. No, I said gently. You made sure it didn't. And then I hung up. Not out of spite. But out of completion. They picked Leona's. Of course they did. It was the restaurant we used to visit for birthdays, promotions, family milestones. Brick walls, flickering sconces, too many ceiling fans. We once blew out candles here. Now, the only thing burning was the illusion they still had control over me. I arrived 15 minutes late, intentionally. Power doesn't rush. Warren sat stiff at the end of the long table, arms crossed like a man preparing for war. Lynette looked like she hadn't slept. Rhett was scrolling his phone, smirking like this was beneath him. There was an empty chair waiting for me, as if I could still be summoned. Rhett stood when I walked in. Thanks for coming. I didn't come for you, I said, calmly taking my seat. Let's not waste each other's time. Warren leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. You made your point. Loud and clear. No, I said, my voice measured. The bank made my point. I just stopped protecting your lie. His jaw tensed. Lynette shifted, fingers nervously twisting a napkin. We're trying to hold this together, he said. You think you're punishing us, Rhett snapped, but you're punishing the legacy Grandpa built. I looked at him, unwavering. Grandpa built a garage. You turned it into a dictatorship. We gave you everything, Warren said. You gave me a job, I replied. Not a voice. Silence fell over the table, thick and hot like summer air before a storm. Then, finally, Lynette whispered, What do you want, Harper? It was a question I'd waited my whole life to be asked. I reached into my bag, placed a sealed envelope on the table. This is a signed affidavit. I've withdrawn from the company loan, the board, and all business operations. Legally and permanently. You will never use my name again. Warren opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. I'm not finished. I took a breath. I'm also submitting an anonymous tip to the state auditor. There are funds missing, vendors unpaid, payroll inconsistencies. This, I pushed the envelope toward them, is your mess now. Rhett's face turned crimson. You're destroying us over ego. I'm not destroying anything, I said, standing. I'm just removing the illusion that I was ever part of it. I was halfway to the door when I heard it. A voice I never expected to stop me. Harper, please. It was my father. Not demanding. Not cold. Just pleading. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. You left a voicemail telling me we were done, I said, steady. I'm just agreeing with you. Formally. And then I walked out. The story made it into a small business digest a week later, Lane Ottawa facing financial turmoil amid internal disputes. I didn't leak it. But I had a pretty good idea who did. Danielle called 2 days after. When people lose power, she said, half serious, half smiling, they look for someone to blame. They just didn't expect that person to have already walked away. The voicemails kept coming after that. Sharper, angrier. From my father. You ungrateful child. We built that business for you. From Rhett. You think you're clever, but you'll need us someday. From Gordon, the accountant. You've destroyed their legacy. Do you even understand what this means? But here's what none of them said, what they wouldn't dare admit. They destroyed it long before I pulled out. When they used my name, but denied me a seat. When they called me family, but treated me as leverage. When they mistook my silence for consent. Now the loan was collapsing. Accounts frozen. Vendor contracts unraveling. And me? Untouched. No legal blowback. No financial damage. My credit intact. My savings protected. I forwarded the last voicemail to Danielle, then deleted the rest. I turned my phone off silent. And for the first time in years, it stayed quiet. I moved into a modest loft in downtown Portland. It wasn't glamorous as bare brick, old windows, but it had sunlight, a writing desk, and something I hadn't felt in years, space. Not just physical. Emotional. Mine. I started consulting again, small, women-led startups mostly. I helped them identify red flags, build safeguards. Not because I needed purpose. Because I already had it. 3 months later, a letter arrived with the bank's logo, no return address, just a barcode and the weight of closure. This letter confirms the commercial loan associated with Harper Lane has been formally withdrawn and restructured. No further obligation remains. No apology. No spin. Just a line in ink. In law. In truth. I placed it in a folder labeled complete, slid it into the back of the cabinet. That night, I lit a candle by the window. The city hummed below, unaware, alive. I poured a glass of wine. Opened a new client file. At the top, I wrote, "You're not difficult. You're just finally visible." And then I began again. Loyalty is often seen as a virtue, a badge of honor we wear when we choose family over self, silence over conflict, and obedience over truth. But as Harper's story teaches us, blind loyalty, especially when it serves only to keep others comfortable at the cost of our own voice, is not love. It's self-erasure. For years, Harper quietly carried the weight of her family's expectations, thinking that if she worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, stayed quiet enough, she would eventually earn a seat at the table. But sometimes, the greatest courage doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from choosing clarity over chaos, integrity over image, and walking away when your worth is no longer seen. Her journey is not just one of breaking free from toxic control, but of reclaiming identity in the face of deep-rooted patterns. She didn't scream. She didn't burn bridges. She simply told the truth and let the truth do the work. That kind of strength, measured, precise, unshakable, is rarely celebrated, yet profoundly powerful. In a world that often mistakes silence for peace, Harper's story reminds us that real peace begins when we stop justifying pain and start honoring our own truth. Loyalty should never demand invisibility. And love should never ask us to disappear. The lesson is simple, yet bold. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes, because silence might protect the legacy, but truth protects the soul.